Well, the Justice Ministry has now publicly responded to suggestions from groups representing magistrates that some of them may consider going on strike. The Judicial Office Association of South Africa says it's considering industrial action, partly because the Independent Commission for the Remuneration of Public Office Bearers has not given them proper increases. The Justice Department now says judicial officers should not go on strike, that it would be unbecoming for them to do so. But it also says it understands the problems magistrates are facing and that it wants this to be resolved in a peaceful way. Mbekezeli Benjamin is from the organisation Justice Matter. Mbekezeli, good afternoon to you. This is a complicated one for the Justice Department. They don't actually get to decide how much magistrates are paid because magistrates are not public servants. And now they're in the middle of the situation where magistrates are clearly very, very angry.
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to the viewers. Yes, the Department of Justice is quite right that they don't determine the salaries of magistrates. The salaries are determined by the President on the advice of the Independent Remuneration Commission, but also with the consent of Parliament. So it is quite a complicated affair, and there are multiple stakeholders on this issue, and which is why it's probably important instead of shouting at each other and pointing fingers, there should be engagement across all of these different stakeholders, because the Department of Justice, unfortunately, cannot wash its hands of magistrates, because it is the DOJ that is responsible for the administration of the lower courts. That's where the magistrates' courts are. And so they can't simply say, we don't get involved on the salaries issue, but they sort of administer the courts, which involve the working conditions. And that is also something that came out in our research, where we found that the working conditions, beyond just the salary, the working conditions of magistrates' courts generally are deteriorating and at an alarming rate. And that should be something that the Department of Justice and other stakeholders in government are addressing. So
from what you say, magistrates do have a case. They're not being properly treated.
Well, yes, magistrates for a very long time, and of course we can extend this to the Superior Court judges when it comes to issues of infrastructure. They unfortunately have not been served well. It is quite complicated to get things in the courts, for example, to be maintained, for things like generators to be installed in the courts. That was something that took a long time, because not only do judicial officers deal with the Department of Justice, they also have to deal with the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. So on the infrastructure issue alone, that is something where judicial officers are quite correct to complain about. And that also includes issues of safety and security in the courts. That is something that they have no control over, but it is a vital way affecting the experience of anyone who uses the courts. So they are quite correct.
The issue then of how do we resolve this? So magistrates want to go on strike, and obviously the Justice Department wants to avoid that. It would be very difficult, I mean, almost dangerous for judicial officers to go on strike. I mean, it would cost them credibility, wouldn't it? It would be illegal.
Well, yes. In terms of the legal framework, judicial officers cannot easily go on strike. But the more serious concern is on the impact that this will have on the users of the courts. You know that magistrates deal with some of the most vulnerable members of our society, children who need maintenance, women who are seeking protection from domestic violence issues, people who are really have small businesses and need to get those businesses paid out. And those are cases, sort of bread and butter issues that are dealt with at the magistrates' court. So if ever there was a work stoppage or any sort of industrial action such as a strike, that would have an immediate impact on very vulnerable people who cannot afford to have their case delayed due to a strike.
Where's the blockage here? I mean, is it the Independent Commission for the Remuneration of Public Office Bearers, which really needs a shorter name? Is it something else? Is there some other problem that's led to this?
Yeah, there are multiple problems, but I think we sometimes call it the IRC for short, the Independent Remuneration Commission. That commission is tasked with doing a very important role in terms of assessing the working conditions of magistrates and using HR methods in order to determine what should the magistrates be paid. And so that is something that the IRC, which sits at the presidency, that is one body that is actually at the center of this. But there are others that also feed into the work that the IRC does, because in determining the salaries of magistrates, the president, for example, is the final deciding person, because in the recent past, the president has granted 0% increases for all judicial officers. And that obviously created this big gap between what judges get paid versus what magistrates get paid, to the point where last year they announced a different increase for magistrates compared to other office bearers, because they realized that it was affecting them more than anyone else. So there are multiple stakeholders who have a role to play. Parliament needs to also come on board, and which is why we are proposing that instead of shouting at each other in the media and in public, there should be a coming together where people sit around the table and discuss this issue.
And then, Mbekezeli, I mean, there's nothing stopping a magistrate from resigning as a magistrate and going back to being an attorney, and they'll probably make more money there. Isn't that the great risk?
Yes, that is a huge risk in terms of people who want to become magistrates, because there is also something important. We want the very best legal practitioners to come in as magistrates in our courts. But there's also the issue of retention. And this is something that came out in our research, where we asked judicial officers, magistrates, what is the one thing that would make you stay your entire career as a judicial officer? And a lot of people raised different concerns, including support, including career advancement. But the one thing that came out quite sharply was issues of salaries, benefits, and conditions of service. So it is one thing that is a risk to people staying in the magistracy, and that is a risk that we cannot afford, considering the important work that magistrates do for vulnerable people.
Mbekezeli Benjamin, thank you, from Justice Matter. Really do appreciate the time.